Hello and welcome to the Story Behind the Stories, your weekly look at the pages of the Neepawa Banner Press. Thank you very much for taking a little bit of your time and spending it right here with us on NAC TV. I'm Eoin Devereux, journalist with the Banner Press, welcoming you to this week's edition of the program, and I am joined this week by fellow journalist Casper Wehrhahn. Casper, good to have you here this week.
Good to be here as always, and going through all the stories that we have in this week's paper.
Most definitely, and there's so many intriguing stories that sort of popped out in this week's edition of the paper. If you are a loyal and consistent reader of the newspaper, and if you are a loyal and consistent viewer of the Story Behind the Stories, you'll most likely know that last week, Casper, it was yourself and Ken that were on this week's, or the edition of the show. If I remember correctly, time has no meaning anymore. I mean, that could have been a year and a half ago for all I remember, but if I remember correctly, because you last week did all the heavy lifting in terms of getting that thing together, in terms of getting the stories together and all that, because a couple weeks ago I was out sick and was still to the degree recovering last week. Not to toot my own horn too much, but this week I made up for it. I really averaged things out because there are a whole kit and caboodle of stories that I was able to come up with for you, and some of which quite by accident, much like the first page.
Yeah, it was quite the surprise. I'll let Owen talk about it more, but yeah, it was one of those things where went out to one thing, just expecting that one thing, and, well, we got something else as well, which was pretty awesome.
Boy, did we ever. During last week's filming of the Story Behind the Stories, which was Casper and Ken Waddell, I headed out a little further west, out to Minnedosa, to check out the health and wellness fair that was going on that day, on Friday the 4th, if I remember correctly. And when I got there, I came across another story completely by surprise, which turned into our front page. It's something that's been on the works and in the works for Minnedosa and surrounding area for just over a year right now. A new active living complex for seniors, a living complex planned for within the community of Minnedosa, but would cover and be sort of affiliated with 7 different RMs surrounding Minnedosa as well. So this isn't just a Minnedosa story, this is a Westman story, this is a very regional story. And I'll be honest with you, I fell across it completely and utterly by accident. If I had shown up 15 minutes later to the Health and Wellness Expo, which was going on throughout the afternoon, I wouldn't have had this story at all. But I walked through the door just in time to see one of the representatives for it, Grant Butler, who is also a council member in the town of Minnedosa, but that's a completely separate thing here. He's also part of the board, started the representatives for Valley Living Housing Group, Valley Life Housing Group, who are trying to put this thing together. And he was explaining to the people in attendance some of the new ideas, some of the new concepts, and more importantly, a brand spanking new artist rendering of what this active living facility, what this new senior living complex is going to look like in Minnedosa. This was also something that came out of the blue. Talking to people afterwards, it's like, oh no, we had some stuff together, so we decided last minute, hey, let's share some of these details. It wasn't on the agenda in any way, shape, or form. It was just like a spur of the moment. It's like, let's do this. What the heck? We got nothing else to do this weekend. Let's inform the people of this major complex. Okay, thank you very much. And it was just, like I said, perfect timing. I walked in and Grant was doing his presentation. He was sharing with them some of the very important details, such as the original concept was about 47, 48 suites, but they have bumped it up to 50 suites that will be available. And the reason they did that is because it allows them an opportunity potentially to get more accessibility to different variety of loans. Most notably, the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, which could help them get this thing off the ground. And they want to get it off the ground ASAP. They are optimistic, they are hopeful that they can get a shovel in the ground on this new project in 2025. We're in October of 2024, and we're just a snap of fingers away from 2025 happening. And that is so impressive because they still got to do a lot of fundraising. Their hope, their expectation for this $18 million project is to be able to raise locally in and around Minnedosa between $3 to $5 million. The rest of it's going to come through loans, hopefully. They'll figure something out on that. They're still in the very preliminary stages of getting this organized, but they are getting it organized. They are getting things going. So if you are interested in learning about this spectacular project, and I have to admit as well, I walked through there and it caught me out of the blue because I hadn't followed this project. I readily admit this one slipped under my radar. When I came back to the office, I asked Casper and I asked Ken Waddell, guys, do you guys remember covering this story about a year ago about this housing complex that's being planned for Minnedosa? And they both slightly gave me that little quizzical look. It's like, what are you talking about? So it was just very fortuitous and very fortunate and lucky that I walked in on this to be able to get this story, this important story for our region. So hopefully you take that in mind when you pick up a copy of the Banner Press and go through it, because if you take a few minutes to read up on it, I think it'll be very intriguing to you to see what's happening just a little bit down the street there. Casper, let me get your take on that. I mean, you don't have to worry about a senior active living center, or anything like that for about another, I don't know, about 50 years. But still, let me get your take on that.
I mean, it looks like it's going to be quite the impressive project, just from of course, the information that Eoin did a really hard job of getting together there after coming back from the meeting that day, and of course the artist rendering and all of that. I mean, yeah, that massive facility, 50 suites, it's quite something. And I mean, yeah, the tight turnaround too, that'll be tricky for them. It will be, no doubt. But I'm really hoping that they can pull this together and get that shovel in the ground as they're hoping. I know that they haven't been gifted the land or sold the land at this moment per se. They've just been given sort of a first chance at it if they're able to pull things together so the town can resell if need be. But yeah, if they can pull all this together and get that going for the community in the area, that would be fantastic. Because I think that facilities like this are still in fairly high demand, so this will be a big benefit to Minnedosa and the surrounding areas.
As a nation, yeah, we are getting older on average, and this is something very important. It's something that happened here in Neepawa several years ago with the expansion and the creation of Kinsman Courts 2. That's a perfect example of that. There have been very similar sort of living facilities that have been built and are prospering in communities such as Souris, as Boissevain as well, several that have popped up in Brandon. And it's just the reality of the situation. When you get older, maybe you don't want to deal with the day-to-day headaches of home care. And these are the types of things that can sort of assist you with that. You still have the concept of the home. You still have the feel of a home, but without all the sort of responsibilities. So I do hope that this does succeed in Minnedosa. And if you want to find out more, Casper just shared a little bit of the details in that story, but there's so much more that we could share with you. But that's why you got to pick up a copy of the Banner Press in one of 30 communities throughout Western Manitoba, including Minnedosa. So you can get them there, or you can get it online anywhere on mywestman.ca. Don't forget, it is mywestman.ca. Let's shift over slightly to the story I actually went to Minnedosa to cover. We got an invitation to come out and attend the third annual Health and Wellness Information Fair that was going on at the 50 Plus Activity Center just in downtown Minnedosa. Once again, with Casper and Ken doing last week's edition of The Story Behind the Story, I had a little bit of time and I needed to sort of get some stories together. So I decided, you know what, I'm going to take a trip over. I'm going to check this out myself. So it was very interesting to learn some of the things that they had going on. This is a very informative session for people on a variety of things such as we just shared, this new housing concept that's coming around, as well as an array of information from local groups, local businesses for people, for seniors, and not just for seniors, but it is a 50-plus activity center, so people over 50. So I don't know how I feel about this, Casper, to be honest with you, but unfortunately, I've hit that demographic where it's like, oh, maybe I need to take a pamphlet or two just for my own self-interest, because I'm a 51-year-old man with 71-year-old knees, all right, and a 13-year-old brain, but it all averages out to about 51. So, but it was very informative. Some things like this I think are great for the community, and I had a chance to speak with one of the representatives for Service for Seniors, Elsie Richards. If I pronounce that incorrectly, Elsie, I apologize, but she was able to inform me that they are very happy over the last 3 years with how this fair has been able to progress, bring in new information, bring in valuable information for those in Minnedosa and the surrounding communities. So, and I thought it went over very well. When I walked in, there was a fair number of people there. They were listening to the presentation we just talked about from Valley Life Housing Group, but there were others. There were about 20 booths in total with a variety of information from local groups, local businesses, as I said, talking about all sorts of different health and wellness insights that you do need. You know, my health and my wellness, I kind of, for the most part, took for granted in my 20s. And you start to pay for it as you get into your 30s and into the 40s and into the 50s and so on and so on. So I found a few things in there that were like, okay, all right, maybe I do need to learn a little bit more on this. Thank you very much for that. So I found it to be informative, and hopefully it will be informative for you as well. Yeah.
Definitely, yeah. Things like this are great. Of course, it puts forward a lot of great information, not just for people within the target demographic, but anyone who might be curious about it as well, that maybe is just thinking to the future or just general curiosity. I mean, there's a lot of resources out there that are of help to people, and it looks like it had a really good attendance. And I mean, yeah, health and wellness, that's a very important thing to be at the top of your mind for your life. And I admit I kind of need to get better at myself again. I've been a little lackadaisical on my daily walks.
Oh, come on, you're still in your 20s. When you hit 30, 31, you fall completely off the cliff. Mm-hmm. That happens. But, you know, you still got about 5 years or so. You're fine. You can coast.
Still good.
Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic event.
All right, now, and again, you can find that information in this week's edition of the Banner Press. The Healthy Living Active Center is on page 1 and page 2, and the Health and Wellness Fair is also on page 2 of this week's edition of the Banner Press. I should go skip ahead a little bit here, Casper, and when we're talking about health, we're talking about wellness. Actually, this will be a kind of a nice segue into something you put a lot of work into in this week's edition in terms of our special feature. If you've been a loyal and consistent viewer of the show, you know we followed right from the get-go the development of the new facility for Harris Pharmacy right here in Neepawa. They built a brand new building just a little further down the road on Mountain Avenue, and it is now officially open. So we were able to put together a special feature inside, sort of just looking back at all the little steps it took to get to this moment in time. And Casper, you were the one that really sort of put together the actual physical representation. Well, you and Diane Warner, both in terms of putting that together.
Yeah, it's on page 10 and a portion of 11 there. This is a story that we've covered a fair bit over the years. Of course, has to do with Harris Pharmacy, if you didn't have a guess already. And of course, the big move from the old location to the current location at, I believe it's 366 Mountain Avenue. I mean, this was about 2 years of hard work with planning and construction, all that sort of stuff, getting everything moved over, all the I's crossed or I's dotted and T's crossed rather. So we have that feature on Harris Pharmacy on those pages. A little bit of a short article going through just a couple sort of short form highlights from stories in previous Banner issues. So we have it dated according to the edition of the Banner it showed up in, and some details going throughout there. And of course, some photos from over the years, sort of cataloging the announcement and the start of construction and the move and all that sort of stuff, and a little bit of how it's looking today. So I hope everyone will take a look at that and well, get acquainted with it. And if you're able to yourself, take a look down there at the new location in person. It is quite impressive, I have to say.
That's right. Actually, when I went down to get some finalized pictures on the completed facility, it's actually the first time since they put everything in there that I've had a chance to go in there myself and see it with my own eyes. So it is quite spacious, a lot of valuable information there. I mean, when you look at that, as well as the improvements and the new ownership over at Neepawa Pharmacy, just a little down the road, it's really nice to see that we have two thriving businesses such as that are in the business of wellness, that are able to facilitate and to assist our local community in the way that they are. So shout out to Neepawa Pharmacy, and of course shout out to Harris Pharmacy on their new and improved building. All right, let's get into the meat and potatoes of this week's story. A lot of information. If you didn't get a chance to see it right here on NAC TV, the town council meeting recently held for October 1st. I was able to get a couple stories out of that. One of which is just a general sort of coverage of all the pertinent information that came through. Just bullet pointed for the most part. I know, because I feel it as well, I'm the one that writes it, so I know exactly how you're feeling as you're reading it. Sometimes this information is really dry. It's just numbers. It's just information. It's just like you start, oh my God, why did I learn to read? Why did my parents teach me words? But trust me, this stuff in the meeting is important. And there was one other story I wrote, a separate one. Maybe not as important, but just between you and me. It is a story I wrote about the Neepawa Chamber's letter of concern to the town of Neepawa about the deterioration of the road. Now look, as I was writing it, I was thinking myself the same thing you might be thinking when you're reading it. There's a little bit of sensationalism there, isn't it, Eoin? It kind of is. It most likely could have been put into the council story as a part of it as well, but I felt like it was important enough because it's something we in the community of Neepawa have talked about all year, is the unfortunate deterioration and the breakdown of many roads in Neepawa. It's not something, and again, people love to lay blame. They would love to just say, oh, the town's not doing this, the council's not doing this, administration's not doing this. And I didn't want to come off that way because I sit in at every Neepawa council meeting, almost every Neepawa council meeting, and I listen to what they're doing, and I see the progress they're trying to do, and I see the limitations that they have in a community of the size of Neepawa. There's only so much money that can go around. And there are sometimes outside factors that play into things like roads. And this is a perfect example of it. Town Neepawa earlier this year put aside a lot of money for road upgrades. Just the regular upkeep, but also a major repaving project for a pair of blocks, one over on Mill and one over on Hamilton. Those were supposed to be done sometime this year. But outside forces came in and put the kibosh on that in the form of the 18th Street repaving in Brandon. Truth is, as much as we love this town and as much as this town is growing, we're not the big deal. We're small potatoes compared to projects that go on in Winnipeg. And we're small potatoes to projects that go on in Brandon. So all the companies and all that put all their time and all their attention into the 18th Street project, as they probably should. It's a bigger project, bigger money. You know, you've got to look out for your business best interests. But unfortunately, that means that no paving companies, none of those types of companies that do that type of work were available for the town of Neepawa. So that means we sort of have to wait and see again. Chamber of Commerce, back to them. They sent a letter. They said, we appreciate all the things you do, but all of our members, for the most part, are very concerned about the deterioration of the roads within the community. We feel that over the long term, it could have a negative impact on commerce in our community. People maybe don't want to drive down these roads, down to these businesses. And that's a valid point on their part. But having said that as well, there are outside forces from the town of Neepawa that they can't control. And they're just as frustrated. When I was writing this, I didn't want people to start blaming the town of Neepawa and blaming the administration for stuff not getting done. They're trying to get the stuff done. And they're just as frustrated about the stuff not getting done as you are or I am. But that's just the way it is. So if you want to get a little more in-depth into that, you can find that story as well as the council story on page 7 of this week's edition. And again, the interesting thing is when you read the Neepawa council story, there are other aspects of it that in the grand scheme are much more important. Like the tender to Rob Smith and Son, $1.9 million, the expansion of the Oberon well mechanism, and the twinning of the raw water supply. That, in the grand scheme for all of us, actually will have more impact, more positive impact than roads. But, having said that, let's be honest, that's kind of a dry... You fell asleep as I was reading that sentence, didn't you? It's okay, admit it. I almost fell asleep as I was reading it aloud. Sometimes you got to go with the sexy story. Sometimes you got to go with the more sensational story to sort of go with it. I'm not exactly proud of it, but I still go forward with it. So that's a fault on my character, perhaps. But you can decide for yourself whether it has value or not. You can find both stories. They're on page 7 of this week's edition of the paper. Let me throw to you, Casper. I think I've buried myself enough on this. Let me get your take on it.
I don't think I have too much to add. It's definitely understandable where the chamber is coming from, and I mean, residents and business owners and stuff have, I think, commented on it for, over the course of the year, really, the condition of the roads and all that sort of stuff. And again, valid concerns all around. And, they do have a point there. They really do. And it is unfortunate that even though council had a plan for it, it got shoved aside, right? As Eoin mentioned, there is some circumstances outside their control that unfortunately just sort of made the whole thing a wash. And of course, people are concerned, understandably, and I'm sure council is as well. We are getting close to winter. Winter's going to play its part, however that's going to look this year. God knows. I don't know. And then, of course, the coming spring, and that will definitely affect things to a further extent, wherever things are already rough. And then, of course, you'll have added rough spots in other locations that were maybe fine before, but won't be come the next spring. That will have to get taken a look at, too. And then, of course, the cost is going to go up. So that's going to be a concern for council as well.
Geez, Casper, way to depress us with all this reality. I mean, God.
But it is nice to see, though, that even though they can't quite get to things how they would like to, I have seen around town in certain spots that some places that were just filled in with gravel previously, such as up by the one church there by the lights, those have been filled in with asphalt, and there's been some patching here and there with asphalt for different holes that might have been a concern and all that. So at least those are getting taken care of, and it's definitely a help in the meantime, just sort of doing what they're able to do until they can actually get to what they're hoping to do to cover everything.
That's right. All right, let's shift gears. A little more positivity to finish off this week's edition of the Story Behind the Stories. I'm going to shift over, Casper, actually to your story first here. I want to make sure that this has the proper amount of time. You were able to head down to Arts Forward last week and get a little information on a new exhibit, but it's a little bit more than that. I mean, there was a little bit of an interactive aspect to it with the opening, I thought, which was fantastic.
Yeah, it was certainly a good event here. This was the opening of a new exhibit at Arts Forward for the duration of the month of October. So definitely take a check down there and see it for yourself. But this is for the Footnotes exhibit, which is done by artist Stephanie, and if I remember correctly, the last name is pronounced Bredeker. And she's currently from Mendoza, has been kind of all around in Canada a little bit since originally coming over from Germany a number of years ago. And it has a focus on wildlife, and the opening that was on, I actually don't have it highlighted here, but it was sometime earlier last week, sort of to the end of the week, I believe. And there were student groups coming out there, getting to meet with Stephanie, ask some questions, tour the exhibit themselves, and of course a fundraising lunch for Cat's TNR Rescue as well, which was great. And in addition to Stephanie's art being on display, it does have a very special title, Footnotes, which I hope you'll take a look into the article and find out why it's called that. But her hope for this exhibit is to try and get people feeling more connected with wildlife and hopefully sparking further interest in conservation.
That is fantastic. And we wish we had more space to be able to show you some of those art exhibits, because of all the pictures Casper took, there were so many that were just inspiring, awe-inspiring. But we didn't have room to be able to share them all in this week's edition. That's why I hope you'll take the time to go down to Arts Forward and see it with your own eyes, because it was so utterly impressive. One other thing, I hope you maybe take a quick jaunt down to the United Anglican Church here in Neepawa 4, is the creation of a new commemorative bench. I had last week Nancy Hunter and Jackie Schneider share some of the details of that with me. If you remember, the St. James Anglican Church and the United Church amalgamated together about a couple years ago, and they become the Anglican United Church. And they want to commemorate their old home at St. James Anglican, just over on the highway, and they did so. With only a minute or two left, I can't even go into the details of this. That's why you got to pick up a physical copy of the paper. You can find this story on page 9 of this week's edition. I'm very appreciative of Nancy and to Jackie to sort of bringing the story to light to me and sharing some of the details and helping me share some of the legacy of St. James with those of you that may not be familiar with it. Or maybe you are familiar with it, and it'll be a nice little trip down memory lane. There's so much more we could talk about, but there's only 30 minutes and a half hour. Strange that, isn't it?
It sure is, right?
Yeah.
We
could have talked about the Titans recently. We could have talked about National Newspaper Week. We could have talked about Grit Force Fitness's wonderful donation to a local family during the September challenge, but we didn't have time. That's why it's important for you to pick up a copy of the Neepawa Banner Press and see all that for yourself. Don't forget, you can find it in 30 different communities throughout Western Manitoba. Physical copies throughout the Westman region. And if you're not able to, always remember, as we say, you can find it online at mywestman.ca. And of course, if you have any story suggestions for us, we are appreciative of that. You can always send them our way over at news@neepawabanner.com. Once again, that is news@neepawabanner.com or 476-3401. That pretty much wraps it up for us for this week's edition. We always appreciate you taking a little bit of time, spending it here with us. Casper, thank you very much as always.
Yeah, thanks again for having me here and all your hard work this week, Eoin.
Oh, don't worry. I'm going to get real lazy in next week's edition again just to even it out. So, Once again, thank you, and thanks to NAC TV, and we hope you continue to tune in to the silliness that is the story behind the stories. Have yourselves a wonderful weekend and a great Thanksgiving.